about if we get started? First, I'm going to say this is a very nice turnout we've got here. We've had, in the past, we've had, when we started the program about 7 or 8 years ago, we'd have 40 or 50 people here, and as time went by, each year we have fewer because the people who've been through the information before already have it. And so, how many of you are new to this workshop? Have never been? Oh, great. Okay. So every year we say, well, how many people do we think we're going to have? And I'm thinking, oh, we're probably down to 10 now. And then we make 25 copies of the handouts, and we end up using them all. So thank you very much for coming. My name is Bob Williams. I'll be doing the workshop part of the presentation. And also here today is Jan Zaboral. Jan, raise your hand. Jan is in charge. He's the head of the Phragmites Advisory Board of the township. And I am just a consultant doing the presentation on controlling Phragmites. And it looks like we don't have any of the other board members here now, but we might have some come in and I'll introduce them. If you have any questions about the permitting process and buying the chemicals, Jan is the one who will answer those after the workshop. And today I'm going to go through this, and I'm going to ask you to hold your questions until the end because they're going to be videotaping this and using the presentation on the website, so others who couldn't make it or on future years, anytime people can get to this information. So my name is Bob Williams. I have a place here in the township. It's called Stewart Farm over on Harson's Island, and I've been working on my Phragmites there for about 12 or 13 years, maybe a little bit longer. And I first got started when I talked to the people at the DNR when they started spraying at St. John's Marsh. And I learned from them what to do. And then started working on my property. And one day somebody came over and said, how come I see your Phragmite dying? And I said, well, it's because I've been treating it. They said, well, tell me what to do. And I said, yeah, I will, but it'll take about a half an hour. How about if you come over on Saturday and I'll explain the whole thing to you. And they said, can I bring some friends? And I said, oh, sure. Well, 71 people showed up that Saturday to find out about how to treat Phragmites, and that's when we began to realize that there was a lot of interest in getting rid of Phragmites. So this is our workshop, and we call it Practical Phragmites Control because if you just go online for information about Phragmites control, you will mostly have access to information from the DNR and big organizations, Ducks Unlimited and so forth, about how they control Phragmites. And they're going to talk about helicopters and big tanks and stuff like that. Well, ours is based strictly on what the homeowner needs to know about Phragmites control. So let's get going on this. My name is Bob Williams. I have a website called Phragmites.org, which has a lot of this information on it. And you can always contact me through bob@phragmites.org. Today you're going to learn about what you need to control it, what kind of chemicals you might use, where you can get them, what they cost, whether or not you should be cutting your Phragmites, about safety things you should think about when you're using the chemicals and doing the cutting, what equipment you'll need, when you should be doing this, because the timing is very important to get the chemicals to kill the plants, and whether or not you need any permits. So generally, here's some problems that are caused by Phragmites. This is my two-story house out on Harson's Island, and you can see that when I started, we could not see out of the second floor of the house because of Phragmites. It blocks views. That's what it looks like now. I've gotten rid of the Phragmites, most of them anyways, and now I've got some nice cattails and rushes and things like that. It is a fire hazard. Here's some Phragmites too close to this boathouse. Here it is under telephone lines. If that catches on fire, it melts the wires. And you can see here with this Phragmites being about 15 feet tall, these flames are 30 or 40 feet tall. So it's a real fire hazard. It clogs water intakes. In a nuclear reactor, they had a problem one time because the water intakes got clogged. It reduces the native plant and animal habitat and the population and diversity. Here you see what it looks like. This has been cut down, but getting right into the deep stand, there's nothing left there but Phragmites. So it has reduced or killed off all the native plants. It limits access for recreation. Here's a canal on Harson's Island, which as you go down the canal, you're not going to be able to get through because of the Phragmites. It dries out wetlands, reduces your property values. It damages good landscaping. People have put in thousands of dollars worth of landscaping and it gets overrun by Phragmites over a 5-year period and all that money was wasted. It's a navigation hazard on roads and waterways. A few years ago there was an incident in Cotterville of a young man pulling out of a driveway and he couldn't see the traffic because of the Phragmites growing up in the road right away, and he was killed. And Jan here will tell you other incidents of hazards on waterways where we have so many curvy waterways, and if people are going too fast around those curves and they can't see a couple hundred yards ahead of them because of the Phragmites, it's a hazard to boaters. And it has hindered search and rescue operations, particularly in the winter. We hear about someone falling through the ice and they go out to try to find them, and because of the Phragmites, they have a hard time seeing where the person has gone in. Out in Provo, Utah, they talk about it harboring West Nile virus, spreading mosquitoes out there. So there's also a health hazard involved. People usually want to know where it came from. Native Phragmites has been here for hundreds or thousands of years. But the variety that we're talking about here has only come over since the early 1800s. When ships would come over here and get goods and take them back to Europe, such as pelts or whatever, when they were in Europe, in order for that ship to handle better in the water coming back here empty, they would fill up the bottom of the ship with soil out of the harbor where they were going to in Europe, and that soil had pieces of Phragmite in it and was transported over here. Then they'd empty it out in the harbors here or nearby so that they could then fill up with goods, and so that's how it is thought to have gotten here. This is a couple of maps. This is native types of Phragmites. Before 1910, it was all of the United States, and this is native halotypes or native types after 1960, so it's still throughout the United States. But the invasive type that we have, before 1910, it was only known in a few spots on the East Coast, and now after 1960 it's all over, so it really has spread very fast. When did it become a problem? Well, back in 1972, does anyone recognize this clip from a TV movie?
It's The Godfather.
This is The Godfather, right. And as I recall, there was a statement, something about leave the gun and take the pizza or something like that after they knocked the guy off in this car. But you can see when they filmed this back in 72, there was Phragmites right near the Statue of Liberty. So it's been around for a while. Where does it grow? Now I see that we're cutting off a little bit. Let me see if I can adjust this just slightly. There we go. What do you know? This is in retention ponds. I think this is out on 23 Mile Road. It grows along waterways, both large ones and small ones. It grows out in the wild. It even grows in well-kept areas. This is right in downtown St. Clair, where they've got all this beautiful landscaping near the water tower, and there's some Phragmites starting to grow. I'll go back this year and check on that, because this was about 3 years ago that I took that picture. So we'll see whether or not it's gotten out of control or they've done anything about it. Here it is in residential area. People have nice landscaping in front of their house leading up their driveway, and here's Phragmites coming in. It's going to spoil everything on them. And it's along road, railroad right-of-ways, along expressway ditches. That's where you see a lot of it. Along the expressways, it gets spread because the seeds will float up in the air, stick to cars, particularly after a rain or so, and then they drive down the road, and 20 or 30 miles later, it might dry out and fall off. And so in Michigan, one of the main spreading factors is vehicles along the expressways. And then once it's spread all the way up I-75, then it starts taking off on the side roads as people spread it without knowing. It grows along local ditches on little hills. Now these are some piles that were some leftover soil that someone moved there. And so here it is on the top of the pile. Some people think that it only grows in wet areas, but it does not. It'll grow in dry area. But when you see it on a hill like this or in a dry area, it's usually because the root pieces were in that dirt when it was placed there. So wherever they dug that dirt from had Phragmites, they brought it in, piled it up, and those roots took off real easy. Compared to seed, the seed has a much harder time getting started. Here it is up in St. Clair, I think, on about a 40 or 50 foot tall hill, and it's right on the top. And this was a berm that was put in near the power plant there, and so whatever soil they brought in brought the roots with it. At utility sites, here it is right in downtown Detroit near the Renaissance Center. This is a construction site that someone walked away from for about a year. And when they came back to finish, the whole basement was filled with Phragmites. So we're going to talk about practical Phragmites control for homeowners. We're not going to talk so much about conservation agencies, but I'd like to tell you the differences between the two in terms of how they work and why we have different requirements. Homeowners are usually working with small sites, very limited resources. They're usually doing the work themselves. They want fast results. They want complete removal. Nobody usually says, I want to get it about 80% under control. And they usually can focus on the details. Now, with large agencies, when you hear them talk about doing Phragmites control, such as the DNR or Ducks Unlimited, they're working on large sites. They usually have very short-term funding. Okay, we've got money for 3 years, then we're going to have to go somewhere else and work. They hire contractors to do the work. They're responsible to provide the greatest amount of service to the public for the dollars that they have, which means that they would rather get one site 90% under control and go to another place and do another 90% somewhere else rather than killing it completely on any one site. And I understand that because the amount of money it would take to kill that last 10% would be about the same as what it took to kill 90% on another piece of property. Because it's the end details, the last bit of it, that is the most difficult and takes the most amount of energy. So there's different goals, and all of these affect how you go about treating it. So the results, homeowners could get 99 to 100% control, and they're invested in continuing to control it. The conservation areas are looking for 90 to 95% control and to control it while they have funding available. They never know when their money's going to be cut off. How does it spread? It can spread by seeds. There's about 1,000 or to 2,000 seeds on every head, and also by the root system called the rhizomes. And if you go to a wet area that has been disturbed and there's Phragmites nearby, you might see these rhizomes actually growing right across the surface of the soil and then putting down roots about every 6 inches. The one time that you can control it by removing the plant physically is when it's growing across the surface and the soil is damp, and when you can pull that root off and take the little pieces that are growing down with it, and when the soil is soft and moist. If you try a regular stand of Phragmites and you want to go out with a shovel and try to dig it up, you're wasting your time, because every time you put the shovel in the ground, you're going to break the root, and every little piece will become a new Phragmites plant. It is persistent. Here it is coming right back through some new pavement that was put down. Here's a parking lot I saw in Berkeley. This was in 2012, and it started growing between the cracks between the cement and the asphalt, and I came back to check on it the next year, and that's what it looked like. So it took over real quick. This is a pond on Belle Isle. There's a little bit of Phragmites here, and I came back, let's see, what year was that? 2011. 2015 I went back, and it had really started to take over. Luckily, Belle Isle has, since it's been taken over by the state government, they are starting to do Phragmites control there, so they'll get it under control. What can you do to control it? Well, the first thing is prevent it. So if you're using any equipment on Phragmites, such as lawnmowers or brush hogs, if you're going to take it somewhere that doesn't have Phragmites, please clean the equipment so you don't take pieces of the plant with you. Early detection, know how to identify Phragmites so that when you see a little patch of it, you can get right to it that year instead of waiting until it gets out of control. Can you dig it out? Well, we talked about this a little bit. Here's John Horvath on Harson's Island, and that's one of the roots that was growing across the surface of this soil that he had disturbed a few months before. This is the exception that I mentioned about not trying to pull it out. Here are roots growing across the surface heading for the water, and those can be pulled out by hand. Can I cut it or burn it? Cutting or burning alone without chemical treatment usually encourages the growth. If you cut every couple of weeks for years in a row, you can set it back. If you're completely opposed to using chemicals, you can reduce the strength of the patch by cutting it regularly. And that also applies to using goats and sheep. There's always these cute articles in the newspaper every year about somebody who went out and rented some goats or sheep and let them go on their property to get rid of the Phragmites. It's the same as cutting. Once those goats or sheep are gone from the property, it's going to start regrowing right away. So it's not a permanent solution. Now, one exception as to not cutting it is if you cut it below the water line, you can have an effect on it. And one way that people cut it below the water line is that there is a sickle bar cutter, a handheld one that the township has one, don't they, Jan?
Yep.
And I think there's arrangements can be made to borrow that at times. And basically that's like a weed whacker type of thing, except it's got a sickle bar cutter on the end with clippers that go back and forth, and you can take that and go a few inches below the water line and cut it off. Now what that does is it starts to drown the plant because it needs the oxygen from the air. If you try that real close to the edge of the water, it may not do a lot of good because all of these roots are tied together in one big plant, so that the plants on the dry part, on the ground, those will feed the oxygen to the rest of it. But if you go into a water that's 2 feet deep and you can go in and cut below the water line, that will really help reduce the plant. So this picture was one that I cut. This stuff in front of us was just like the plants in the background, but I cut the stuff in front of us during the winter. I think I went in there that year with my tractor and cut it right at the ice line. And then in the spring when the water came up, it came up a bit and covered those stalks that I had cut off. Well, this later in the season did grow back. Once it got through that water line to the oxygen, it did start growing. But you can see here that it's much shorter. This is my neighbor's property where it was not cut, and mine was much shorter. Not only will it be not as strong when it's shorter, but it'll be easier to spray. So if you're going to go in there this year and spray that, it's going to be a lot easier to spray the stuff that was cut than the stuff that was not cut. There's another advantage to cutting it in terms of spraying, and that is, you see in this picture, there's a lot of light material. That's the stuff from the previous year, and the dark green material is the stuff that grew up this year. Well, when you go to spray this with chemicals this year, all of the chemicals you spray here are going to go right to the plant. Anything you spray over here, maybe half of it will get to the plant, and the other half is going to go on the dead material that's standing from the year before. And those chemicals on that dead material does nothing to control the plant, because it's not going to go down to the roots and kill the plant. It's just going to sit on the dead material. So, what does control it? Landscape fabric. People have been known to put that over a patch of Phragmites. It can control it if you can go back and keep patching the holes in the landscape fabric or putting more layers over it, but then you can't plant anything else in that area. Cornell University is working on biological controls, 2 different ways. One is controlling the genes of the plant, and I'm not sure how they're going to control them, but they seem to know that that's a possibility. And the other is through insects that might control it. And this year there's been some stuff coming out about insects that they're finding down south that are starting to eat some of the Phragmites. But it's going to be a few years before we get any positive results on that. So the real answer to the question of how do you control it is flooding, cutting, and burning in combination with multi-year herbicide applications can control Phragmites. And it says multi-year because 1 year of chemical application is not going to kill it. The first year, you might get it 90% under control. The next year, you might get another 90% of that leftover 10% under control. But you're still going to have a little bit left on the 3rd year, and it's even recommended that you go back every year after that and watch for new resprouts coming out. Because anywhere that you had a patch of Phragmites that's been around for a few years, there are literally millions of seeds in the ground, and some of those will start sprouting. So think of it like dandelions. You can control your dandelions for a couple of years with chemicals, but if you go away for a couple of years and come back, you're going to find dandelions on your property. And so Phragmites is the same. If you want to get rid of them and keep them under control, you'll need to keep after it. Every year you'll spend less time on it. I mean, I've got areas that, one area in particular that I can think of that I would spend maybe 10 or 15 hours the first year on. Now I spend about 15 minutes a year there. I drive through on my ATV and I look for any sprouts that have come up and I hit it and I'm out of there. So it's just a yearly thing I have to spend 15 or 20 minutes on. What is the best control without using herbicides? And that is drowning the plant by repeated cutting of the stems below the water line. And if you're going to cut it, it's best when the Phragmites reaches about 4 feet or more above the water line. Cut the stems as low as possible below the water line. And I got to think of his name. Gentleman on Harson's Island who's been cutting for a long time.
Sampier.
Sampier, Franz, thank you. Franz Sampier's been doing this. He hasn't used any chemicals, but he goes out in the North Channel every year and cuts below the water line, and he's got it 90% or more under control where he's been cutting. So the best Phragmites control without flooding, because most of us don't necessarily have control of water levels, or without cutting it below the water line, is achieved by a multi-year plan of cutting and or burning in combination with herbicide and surfactant applied mid-August through September. Surfactant is the first time we've used that word. Herbicide, I think everybody knows what it does. Surfactant is something that you add to the chemical mix, which makes the chemicals, allows them to get through the waxy coating on the leaves of the plant. And we're going to tell you what surfactants to use and how to mix it and so forth. Why do herbicides work best? 80% of the Phragmites is actually below the ground. So when you kill or cut the top of it, the rest of the plant is down there very healthy, unless you can get chemicals into the roots. Rhizomes can persist through most disturbances. That's the root system of the plant. And herbicide is the only known method to effectively kill Phragmites roots and rhizomes and leave the area in a condition which can support other plants. How do you get the herbicide into the plant? Foliar spray, which you're just spraying on the leaves and stems. Cut and dab is where you cut the stem and dab it with some chemical. And that's a lot of work, but if you have just a little bit of Phragmites and it's in an area where you don't want to be spraying because you don't want the overspray to kill your good plants, then cut and dab is a good alternative. A glove of death is where you take a nitrile glove, you put a cotton glove over it, and you spray the chemical on the cotton glove, and then you wipe it on the plant. That's another way of getting it onto the leaves without getting it on your other plants. And Wipe It is a tool that I make that is used for wiping it on the plant also. There might be a picture of it here. Oh, there it is. It's just basically some barbecue tongs with some fabric on the end of them, and you spray the chemical on the fabric, and then you wipe it on the plant. Why cut or burn along with the herbicide? It stresses the plant, first of all, if you cut it when it's growing. It allows the soil exposure and blackening to encourage native seed bank germination. That is, if you burn it, you'll get that out of the way so that it'll warm up the soil from the blackening and allow native seeds to come up easier. It allows chemicals to reach the live plant surfaces easier, and it allows better human access because it'll be shorter. You can spray over the top of the plant easier than when it's 15 feet tall like that. Don't waste chemicals on last year's Phragmites. So you go in there and spray this, half your chemicals wasted on the dead material. This is what you want to be spraying on, nice fresh green Phragmites. This was not pre-cut, and you can see how I'm trying to get over the top of it. This was pre-cut, and it's a little bit shorter, so it's easier to spray over the top of that and deeply into the stem. When is best to cut or burn? November to May is the best time to cut or burn it, not within 2 weeks following the herbicide treatment. So if you spray the herbicide on it, wait at least 2 weeks before you cut it to give it plenty of time for that herbicide to get to the roots. And if you're, if you are cutting with riding equipment, such as a tractor, the best time to cut is, to avoid soil disturbance is to do it when the ground is frozen. And nobody wants to go out and cut their grass in January, I know. But I usually find a week somewhere in the second or third week of January where for some reason it starts to warm up. I think we used to have a name for that when I was a kid, with a little warm period in the middle of winter. But that's a good time, nice sunny day. You get out there and you get your Phragmites cut, and it's very satisfying. The biggest mistake that I made in the 10 years of Phragmites control was early on when I did not pre-cut it before the first treatment. If you're going to treat your Phragmites this year, you'll probably be treating it in late August or September. Cut it now or in the next couple of weeks if you can. Then give it plenty of time to grow over the summer, and then you'll have that new fresh green growth for you to treat in September. The first few years I did it, I didn't know about pre-cutting, and it was very hard to get a good control out of it. Okay, the Michigan DEQ recommendations for cutting is no lower than 4 inches from the ground or water line. They're concerned about disturbing animal life that might be in there. So they want you to not cut too close to the ground. Where you have native plants present, they recommend a little higher, 6 inches, and up to 12 inches where there's tall native plants. So their concern is they don't want to reduce the native plant life while you're working on your Phragmites. Here's some field notes about cutting with a tractor or brush hog. They're in your handout. I won't go over these. We'll keep moving on. What do you do with the material that you cut? There's a variety of choices here about how you can roll it down and leave it in place, or mow it, or scrape it off. So you can look that over when you get a chance if you're wondering what to do with the cuttings. The best thing to do is to have that out of the way, either by burning it or taking it off the site. But that in itself is a big project, and if you let that stop you from treating your Phragmites, please don't. Just treat them anyways, even if you don't have the resources to remove the cut material. Make sure you can identify Phragmites and distinguish it from other plants, so you're not going out of your way to kill Phragmites, but killing a lot of cattails in the meantime or something like that. This is Phragmites. You probably all know it, what it looks like. This is one called wild rice. You could confuse it for Phragmites. Cattails. There's rushes, sedges, Indian grass, big blue stem, a very valued plant in the ecological scheme of our area. There's valuable landscape plants that people put in their front yards, which often look like Phragmites, but aren't. And back to Phragmites. Excuse me. Native versus non-native. There are differences between the native Phragmites and the non-native Phragmites, and I'm going to make it simple for you. No native Phragmites has been found in Clay Township anywhere in the last 20 years. So you don't have to worry about killing the native by mistake if you're in Clay Township. These are some differences which when I'm in other places talking, they want to know how to identify the native Phragmites, and you don't have to worry about that. This gives you an idea of the difference though. Native Phragmites is usually very sparse and grows low compared to our invasive variety. So if you're going to work on Phragmites, decide on what your goals are for why you want to get rid of the Phragmites, that you might know already, and decide on, maybe give yourself a timeline as to when you're going to do what. Figure out what resources you have access to, what equipment you have, what procedures you want to follow, the timing of when you're going to do what during the year, what equipment you'll need, what supplies, and then be sure to monitor your progress, because quite often people will go out and treat their Phragmites and not take any pictures before they started, and the next year they'll say, boy, it seems like there was a lot more last year, but I can't remember. So it's nice to have pictures because it's very gratifying the following year to see the difference. So some of the equipment you can use is handheld sprayers or backpack sprayers. The backpack sprayer is a little easier to carry and holds a little bit more, and usually it's a little more powerful spray in terms of the distance. Make sure you do not use any metal tanks, so only use plastic. Because of the chemicals that we use, there is a reaction that goes on between those chemicals and the metal tanks. There's also, on the back of an ATV, you can mount about a 25-gallon sprayer. The others that I showed you were 2 gallons and 3 gallons. 25-gallon, you can go out and do a lot more. And they usually come with a motor that you can hook up to the battery on the ATV, and so you don't have to do any pumping and just go out and spray. This is a makeshift system that we set up early on, about 10 years ago, and we were spraying Brown's Field. So someone just took an old pump motor here, gas-powered pump motor, and we jerry-rigged a tank on a trailer, and we went out and sprayed Brown's Field over there, the pond. You can see there how far we got with it. That was shooting out there about 40 feet into the pond. This is Jan's early rig. Do you still have that, Jan? Or if
I still got the parts around.
Still got the parts. He took his tractor, he put his pump and his tank up here in his front end loader and raised it up, and he built a little tower on there with a sprayer on the top so he could get through his 15 feet tall Phragmites and still get it all sprayed. This is called a Marshmaster. There is one on Harson's Island that Bobby Bryson has at Tajmu Marina. His website is GreatLakesPhragmiteCutter.com, and it can go through just about any wet or dry area and can get in there and cut with this hydraulic brush hog on the back. He charges just roughly
an acre, I think.
What's that?
200 an acre.
About 200 an acre he'll charge to cut your Phragmites for you. It's a lot easier than cutting it yourself. Here's some other equipment that Fran Sampier had rigged up. He took some old pontoons, some old pipes, PVC piping, and made some pontoons for a lawnmower, and then he rigged it up with 3 lawnmowers, and he dragged that across the marsh area, and if he got into water, it would float. He also has, this is from Fran's, a sickle bar cutter that's attached to the side of his regular motorboat, and that is on a ratchet and it swings down underneath the water. That's how he cuts it below the water line. And then he has this rake that he attaches to the front of his boat, and he drives through there and rakes all the dead material that he had cut away, and he puts it up on the shoreline. Here's some definitions. If you're going to start mixing chemicals, you probably want to know these. A pesticide is a chemical for destroying either plants or animals. An herbicide is a particular kind of pesticide that is just for killing plants and especially killing weeds. And a surfactant, as I mentioned earlier, is something that you add, which is like a wetting agent, and it reduces the surface tension of the liquid so it doesn't bead up so much, and it'll soak into the plants. Now, AI is a term that you'll see on the bottles of chemical, and it means active ingredient, and that is the percentage. So you can look at a bottle of Roundup that you buy in the store for killing weeds, and it'll say 1.98% AI. Let's round it off to 2% AI. That means in that bottle that you're buying, 2% of that is herbicide, and the rest of it is other stuff, mostly water. Probably 97% water, and then a few other things they add. If you go to buy the chemicals that the township is selling, it'll be a bottle of either Aqua Pro or Aqua Star. Do you know the brand?
Aquaneat.
Aquaneat. And it'll say 53.8% AI. That means 53.8% of what's in that bottle is the herbicide. So you would treat a bottle of Roundup that you buy for spraying on weeds completely different than the bottle you buy from the township. Because you could water the township down 10 to 1 with water, and you'd still have something that was 5% herbicide compared to the 2% herbicide that you get in the Roundup bottle. So you need to remember that AI is the amount of active ingredient in terms of percentage, so that you don't take your bottle of herbicide from the township and put it in your sprayer the way it is and start spraying it, because you're wasting a lot of chemical that way. Okay, the chemicals. On dry land above the ordinary watermark, you can use Roundup. So if you have some Phragmites on dry land, and you just want to make this a simple thing, go out and buy a bottle of Roundup and spray it on there in late August or September. And that's all there is to it. But if you're anywhere near water where the chemical can get in the water, you're not allowed to use Roundup, because it has other chemicals in it which will damage the marine life in the water. So anywhere near water, you can only use DEQ-approved glyphosate and a surfactant. And glyphosate is the active herbicide that's in Roundup, but here you're buying just the pure glyphosate from the township. Or if you go out, you don't have to buy it from the township, you can also buy it online, other places. But you're going to get a lot better deal from the township, because they buy it by the pallet, and then they sell it to you at cost. Okay, for a list of DEQ approved chemicals, here's a website address. You can go there and see the particular brand names that they do say is allowed to be used. Now, if you're going to do that, of course, you're going to have to mix it yourself. You're going to have to mix it with water. So we're going to tell you how to do that. The mix is going to be the herbicide, surfactant, water conditioner maybe. I don't think a lot of people around here are using water conditioner, because you're using good water out of the tap, hopefully. If you're going to use water out of a lake or out of a stream, you might want to use water conditioner, because there will be other things in that water which will damage the way in which the herbicide works. And optionally, you could put dye in it so you can see where you've sprayed. But most of us who have used dye have given up on it, because most of the dye that's available is blue dye, and you spray it on a green plant, and it's pretty much hard to tell where you just sprayed, even though you have dye in it. So I don't know a lot of people who actually put the dye in there. Why mix your own chemicals? Well, number one, you have to if you're going to spray around water. There's nowhere I know of you can go out and buy a bottle of pre-mixed herbicide to spray over water. And also, if you mix your own herbicide, which is comparable to a Roundup, it's about 1/5 the cost of buying a bottle of Roundup.
So I use this herbicide not only for my water areas, but for all my dry plant herbicide spraying that I do. I don't buy any Roundup anymore. In Michigan, do homeowners need to be certified to mix and apply herbicides? And the answer is they do not. Specifically, the state says people can mix general use herbicide products themselves, and they can apply it themselves if in compliance with the label, including the use of personal protective equipment and disposal, and that they're not doing it for commercial purposes and not in the course of employment. So someone who works at a golf course cannot mix chemicals unless they are certified pesticide applicator. But you as a homeowner are allowed to mix these chemicals yourself without any kind of training or permit. In Michigan, do volunteers in nature areas need to be certified? And the answer is basically the same. No, they don't. If they're volunteering, as long as you're not getting paid in any way or reimbursed for, or not reimbursed, compensated for your work. So as long as they're not, paying something else for you. Now, we have been allowed that in the township, we have talked to the state about this. You got 2 or 3 homeowners in a row, one can buy the herbicide and the others can use the herbicide, mix it, and spray it for everybody. So as long as there's no money changing hands, you're welcome to work it out with your neighbors, who wants to buy it and who wants to spray it. Phragmites herbicides that are approved by the DEQ are labeled caution, as opposed to the more dangerous ones labeled warning or danger. So these are like the least dangerous chemicals of all. They're general use pesticides. They're systemic, which means that it goes into the plant and then it is taken down to the root system, and that's what makes it work. It's drawn down there by the plant. Now that's the reason that we spray in late August and September. That's the time of the year that the plant is taking all of the resources that it has left over from its growing season, and it's going to pull them down to the roots in order to have them ready to start growing next year. They don't want to waste those resources that are in the plant. So at that time of the year, when it's sucking everything down to the roots, you put the chemical on the plant and it'll take the chemical down to the roots with it. These are non-selective and broad spectrum, which means that it'll kill most plants. So don't think that these are just Phragmites killing herbicides. If you spray it on your wife's hydrangeas, you're going to be in big trouble. Okay, there's 2 chemicals that primarily are discussed in controlling Phragmites. One is imazapyr, the other is glyphosate. Imazapyr can be applied in the fall or in the summer. It has a little better control rate than glyphosate, but it costs about 7 times as much. And the one brand name is called Habitat, which you might hear of when you're reading newspapers or something. The one that we only use in the township in terms of selling it to the public and training people to use is called glyphosate. It's applied only in the fall, and here's a variety of the brand names that it goes by. Now, how toxic is this? This is a comparative oral toxicity chart of aquatic herbicides and common household products. So there's a column here called oral LD50. Let me think if I can remember exactly. Lethal dose 50. If you were to ingest 50 milligrams per kilogram of your own weight of nicotine, it is considered to be a 50% chance that you could die from that. So nicotine is right up here, but as you go down this chart, and then the chart continues over here, the higher numbers mean you need a larger amount of that particular chemical in order to kill you. And as you go down, you'll see that aspirin is up here as 200 milligrams could kill you. And as you go down here, table salt, 3,000 milligrams could kill you. And vinegar, but then you get down here, glyphosate, you need over 5,000 milligrams to kill you. And imazapyr is down there at 5,000. So these are very non-toxic chemicals in terms of not putting it on your skin, but ingesting it if you were to ingest it. So this is why we feel very comfortable with advising people that they can use these chemicals. Now the surfactants are the ones that help it spread out on the plant and stick to the plant, and it breaks down the waxy coating. The one that we use in the township is called Signet Plus. It's biodegradable. It's made from citrus rind and some methylated seed oil of canola or soybean or cotton. Water carries the herbicides of the plants. Over 98% of the mix that you make is going to be water. So when you buy that bottle of Roundup and it's 2%, you're going to be mixing stuff that is down close to that kind of ratio. A lot of water and not a lot of chemical. Glyphosate is a very mild acid. In water, it can split into pieces and connect to other large molecules. The parts not split are more readily absorbed by the plant. Hard or dirty water, that is, you take water out of a swamp and mix it with the herbicide, it may not work at all. But you take clean water, even lake water I don't recommend. I prefer to use municipal water. Of course, what is it called? The water, well, spring water would be great too. So we try to avoid using water right out of the lake or out of the ponds. Desirable water qualities: clean, clear, and free of organic materials, low mineral content, so soft water is better, and slightly acidic. Most people don't know the acidic content of their water, but as long as you're using municipal water, you should be fine. Some people use a water conditioner if they don't have access to municipal water. And here's a brand you could use if you needed some. Preferred water, absolutely the best water to use would be distilled water, soft water, municipal water is fine, clean clear lake water or clean clear rainwater. We don't recommend you use well water or pond water. But every year we get someone who says, oh yeah, I'm on a well and I use well water and it worked just fine. And that is true. Depends on your actual water as to whether or not it's going to work well. But I would avoid it if I could. Now, application rates. How much glyphosate are you going to put on the plant? The maximum allowed per treatment under permits and on the bottle is 6 pints of glyphosate per acre, 1 pint of Signet Plus, that's the surfactant, and there's no specification on the water conditioner. Now, if you're going to mix in a low volume sprayer, let's say up to 25 gallons or so, recommendations from this document called A Guide to the Control and Management of Invasive Phragmites, put out by the Michigan DNR, is 1 to 1.5% solution of a 53.8 AI glyphosate product. So here you're starting with a product which is just a little over half glyphosate, and you're going to mix a 1% solution of that. That would give you really a 0.5% AI or 0.5% glyphosate in the mix that you make. So they're suggesting you put in 2 ounces per gallon, which would result in a 0.84% AI. Now, they want you to use a state-approved non-ionic surfactant at the rate recommended on the label, and the label says 1 pint to 2 quarts per acre, and there's no mention of using water conditioner. If you're going to mix 1 gallon in a little hand sprayer, you start with 3/4 of the water, about 96 ounces. If you're using a water conditioner, put it in a 1/2 ounce per gallon. Add the herbicide, 2 ounces. Add the surfactant, about 1/6 of an ounce. Then bring up the water level to fill the tank to the 1 gallon level, 128 ounces. You can add some dye if you want to. And with that mix of 1 gallon, and thinking about the fact that the label says you can only use 6 pints per acre, if you divide it out, the application of 6 pints per acre glyphosate would be comparable to spraying 900 square feet or a 30 by 30 area with that 1 gallon of mix.
Excuse
Now-
me, do you have that in here?
Yes,
Okay.
all the formulas and mixes are all in your handout there. So, my second biggest mistake in 10 years of Phragmites control was not applying multiple treatments the first year. I went out, as the state did on all of their properties, and they sprayed it once in September, and then they waited till next year to see what was killed and what wasn't. Well, I found out, after experimenting, that if you go out in mid to late August and spray it, and come back about 2 weeks later, it takes about 2 weeks for these chemicals to really affect the plant. But if you come back 2 weeks later, you're gonna find little patches that are still green. Mix up some more spray and spray them again. Only the green part though. The part that's looking brown, just leave it alone. Come back 2 weeks later, now you're probably talking about the end of September. Do it one more time to any areas that are still green, and you'll get a much better control than if you do the once a year program that is usually done by all the state agencies. So retreatment. The maximum herbicide quantities to be used that are given on the label are per treatment. So even though we talked about a limit of 6 pints per acre, it specifically says that's each time you spray you can use 6 pints per acre. So technically speaking, you could go out every day in September and spray 6 pints on there. But you'd be wasting a lot of chemical, and it's not a good idea for our environment either. Any of the permits from the state DEQ state that there should be a minimum of 24 hours between treatments. So you can spray one day and you can spray the next day if you want. I obtained the best results by mixing my herbicide at actually a lower AI rate and retreating at 2-week intervals any remaining green Phragmites. So just like I mentioned here a moment ago, go back every 2 weeks. But what I've done is I've cut back. Instead of putting 2 ounces of herbicide in a gallon, I put only 1 ounce. And I have found that I pretty much get the same result in the first 2 weeks, whether I put 1 ounce or 2 ounce in it. So I only put 1 ounce in it, and then the following 2 weeks I use another single ounce of mix, and I'm of course only spraying like 20% of what I sprayed the first time, and the third time around I might only be spraying 5% of the area. So overall I end up with less chemical going in the environment than I had if I'd used the state recommended 2 ounces per gallon in the first place. So not retreating any surviving Phragmites plants after your first spray of the year is kind of like not taking all your antibiotics. Well, you know what the doctors tell you now, you got to take every one of them because the little bugs that are surviving when you only stop at half your antibiotics are the strongest ones, and they're going to come back and get you. So that's how we look at this. You got to keep coming back and getting those strong ones that resisted the first treatment and the second treatment. So here's some samples. All of this pretty much died from the first treatment, but there's a little bit of green over here that survived it. Here's another one. This one, there's more green, even though a lot of this in the distance did get affected by the chemicals. And another example, a lot of brown, but then some green in there. So I'd come back and get that green stuff in the second and third treatments. So I call this the WIPEOUT program. It's Williams Invasive Phragmites Eradication Outline. Anybody want to take that for me? Okay, prior to June, pre-cut it. So hopefully in May you can get it cut. August 15th, you can treat it for the first time or any time soon after that. Of course, you got to wait for good weather, so it might be the 18th or it might be the 20th or whenever you have time. And then September 1st, 15th, or 30th, you can come back and treat anything that's still green. And then you'll stop cutting or stop treating as soon as the first killing frost comes. So it's usually around the first or second week in October. I usually tell people to be safe, I just stop spraying the 1st of October area. unless I didn't get all of it done, and then I will go back and do it. But October 15th or 2 weeks after your last spraying, then you can go back and cut everything down, and you'll be all ready for next year. Mixing 1 gallon of low volume spraying mix under the wipeout. The only difference in this one is the 1 ounce of chemical instead of the 2 ounces. So this is just for the records, and in that case, because the maximum application rate of 6 pints per acre would be comparable to spraying 450 square feet. So you could mix it at 1 ounce and spray a 21 by 21 area. Okay, different AIs for different treatment methods. So far we've been talking about foliar spraying, spraying it on the leaves and the stems. However, if you're going to use the glove of death, where you spray it on your cotton glove and wipe it on, you could use a higher, more concentrated mix of 2.5 to 5% AI, which would be comparable to 6 to 12 ounces of chemical in 1 gallon. And you can use a little higher concentration because when you go to treat that plant, excuse me, you're not going to be able to treat the whole thing. You're just going to grab some leaves, whatever you can reach, and it's 15 feet tall, so you're probably not going to be getting the top half of the plant. If you're using a WIPEOUT, which is something that applies it to the plant, again you could use a 2.5 to 5%. If you use a cut and dab, where you cut the stem and dab it, you can use a 15 to 25% AI, a very concentrated load of chemical going right on that little 1/2 inch or 1/4 inch round stem. Okay, chemical availability and cost. Herbicide, glyphosate, 2.5 gallons is about $100. Let's see, is Jan still here? He's stepped up. Does anybody have the chemical application? How much are they charging this year?
70.
How much?
70.
70, okay.
2.5 gallons.
Thank you. So the township will get that for you for 70, probably online it's 100 or 120 or something like that. Or you can buy something called Shore Clear. If you only need a little bit done, there's a quart bottle called Shore Clear. But you're still going to pay $50 for that. So you might be better off just buying the 2.5 gallons from the township. Now, when you buy that 2.5 gallons, you're not necessarily going to use it all the first year. So you can keep that and use it again up to 5 years, but don't let it freeze over the winter. So don't keep it out in your garage, keep it in your laundry room or somewhere. And when you store it, put it in an old kitty litter bucket, so that if for some reason that thin plastic chemical bottle gets a hole in it, let's say a mouse bites into it or something, you're not going to have chemicals all over your floor. But just put it in an old kitty litter bucket that you find in somebody's trash, and you'll be safe, and keep it in your laundry room or somewhere that is heated over the winter. Here's information on water conditioner if you want to use it. Dye. Optional Shore Clear Plus is mixed down at 18% AI, and you can buy a gallon for $60. But you see with the 18%, you're about, what is that, 1/3 or 1/4 as strong as the stuff that the township will sell at 53.8%. So there are other options besides the stuff you buy from the township. Now the minimum purchase option to mix low volume sprayer mix would be to buy a gallon of Shore Clear Plus at $60, shipping and handling, skip the water conditioner and the dye, and for $80 you could treat 1/3 of an acre. That would come out to a resulting cost of $240 an acre. But if you want a more economical purchase, you'd buy the full 2.5 gallons, and that would cost you about $100, or as he mentioned, $70 here in the township. Add the Signet Plus surfactant, add some water conditioner, add some dye, and for $250 you can treat 300 acres, which is about $75 an acre. And if you leave out the water conditioner and the dye, it's about $50 an acre. So it's not that expensive to treat your Phragmites. And save unused glyphosate, store it for up to 5 years. These are the chemicals I use, Signet Plus, and this is Aqua Pro. That's one that we sold in the township early on. I think I got it back in '08 here. But if you don't get in on this township program, you can buy the same products directly from Signet Enterprises in Flint. Here's the man to call and his phone number, and it's in your handout. When to treat. In southeast Michigan, mid-August to the end of September. Not after the first killing frost, not within 4 weeks of the last time you cut or burn. You want to make sure you have enough new growth up there to absorb the chemicals. Before treatment day, check the weather reports. You don't want to spray and then that afternoon have all the chemicals washed off by the rain. There will be a requirement to post some signs on your property that you have just sprayed. And I'm sure the township has those online for you to print out and put in the information that you need to post. If spraying over water, you're supposed to close down any potable water intakes within a half a mile upstream, and review your plan, reread your chemical labels, and on treatment day, make sure you're not expecting rain, that is not too windy, unless you particularly want the wind at your back to help carry that spray into a deep stand. In that case, a little wind might be good. Sunny conditions increases the absorption of the chemical. Spray the leaves and stems until it's covered, but not to the point where it's dripping off. If possible, learn to spray while walking backwards. Tried all sorts of things, and the best thing seems to be, in order to not have myself dragged through the chemicals that were just sprayed on the plants, is to learn to walk backwards and spray. Try to use all the chemicals that day or soon after. If you mix up the chemicals and use them next weekend, they might not be quite as effective. And clean all your equipment and save the rinse aid. So when you're done working, and even though you think you've used up all your chemicals, of course there's a little bit in the bottle, in the bottom of your sprayer, and the water that you use to rinse that out, save that, and the next time use that as your starter water, instead of taking that chemical and putting it down the drain or out on the property. Keep a record of the date and time and what the weather conditions were, exactly where you treated, what kind of water you used, because at some point in the future, you might say, now why did that area that I sprayed not work as well as somewhere else? And you might go back to your records and find a difference in how you treated that area. After treatment day, don't re-enter the area or swim in there for 24 hours. You can open potable water intakes after 48 hours. Be patient. Don't expect that you're going to go out and see those Phragmites wilting a couple of days later. Give it about 2 weeks before you expect to see any change in them. And don't cut or burn it for at least 2 weeks. Herbicide safety, as I mentioned, these are all labeled caution. Follow the instructions on the label, use proper procedures, and use recommended spraying or safety equipment. The equipment that's recommended is on the label, and it's recommended for the person using the diluted mix to do the spraying. Additional protection is recommended for the person who's actually handling the concentrated mix. For the diluted mix, you should have clothing that's dedicated to when you go out and spray, so that you're not going to be spraying and then go home and take the family out to lunch in the same clothes that has all the chemicals on it. Have long sleeves, long pants, closed-toed shoes, wear socks, gloves, and a hat. But there's no requirement that you have to have any kind of thing over, a mask over your face or an oxygen mask or anything like that. However, I will warn you that if you get out there and you start spraying and you're smelling the chemical, then chances are that it's blowing the wrong direction. So use that as a little caution for yourself. If you can smell it, you might be getting too much on you. For the person who's actually doing the mixing of the chemicals from the concentrate, they should have the same things as the person who's spraying, but they should be using nitrile gloves, and those are available at Costco or Sam's or anything like that. That's basically like a latex glove, but nitrile is chemical resistant. They should have a nitrile apron and gloves or a face shield so that you don't get the concentrated mix spraying in your face. Here's some examples. There's a face shield nitrile apron, nitrile gloves, and that's an optional one in case you're particularly real sensitive to chemicals. You might want to wear a mask like that. You'll need some measuring cups and funnels. You'll need a storage cabinet to store the chemicals that can be locked up and kept out of the reach of your grandchildren. Some storage containers to put these 2.5 bottle containers in, and some emergency information as to poison control and so forth. Maybe some measuring bottles. Instead of trying to pour 2 ounces out of a 2.5 gallon bottle, I go out and buy these chemical bottles that have gradations on them, and you put about 32 ounces in there, and then that will last me the whole season. And you tip the bottle so that you get 2 ounces here on the top, and then you open this spout and pour that into the mix container. So it's a lot easier than trying to get 2 ounces out of a 2.5 gallon bottle. If you are going to use the big bottle, which I've done in this case, I mix it in get a cement mixer or a masonry pail that is available at the hardware store, and I put my my sprayer in there, and then I do all the mixing in there. So if you have any overspray or drippage, it'll go into that masonry container. Abbreviated herbicide safety procedures. You can read those over. They're all in your handout. Additional safety requirements, which are mentioned in all the state permits. You get a copy of that with the state permit, and it's in the handout. Do you need permits to remove, cut, burn to herbicide? It is 5 after 11. I'm going to roll through this quickly. The one thing you should know is that if you need permits, the easiest way to get them is through the township program here. You sign up and pay that fee, and I think that if you went to the township or went to the state and applied for the permit, I think the permit is more expensive than what the township charges you to be in their program. There is no such thing as a permit to remove Phragmites, either to dig it out or in any way remove it like that. But there are permits to burn. Contact your local fire department if you're going to burn your Phragmites, or hire a prescribed burn contractor. Permits to cut Phragmites, there is a requirement if you're between the ordinary high water mark and the water's edge, or you're in the water. You need a permit for that. Any Phragmites in standing water in the Great Lakes, a permit to cut Phragmites and a control plan is required. When you apply through the township, they'll get you both your spraying permit and your cutting permit. The EPA has also an herbicide permit for Phragmites, but it only applies if you have hundreds of acres, so I don't think you have to worry about that. Permit to herbicide Phragmites by the DEQ, well, let's just move on through here because you're probably going to get it through the township and you don't have to worry about whether you meet these requirements. There are 2 kinds of permits if you go to the state, an individual permit or a general permit, and in this case there's a 3rd permit, and that is the one through the township. If you're going to hire a contractor to do any work for you, make sure that they have a proper pesticide application business license with a Category 5 aquatic pest management certification and a Category 6 right-of-way certification. And there's a list of contractors on the state website at that address. If anyone is anyone doing anything about Phragmites, all of these are areas in the state which are working on Phragmites. Beaver Island, of course, the Clay Township Phragmites Advisory Board. There's one in Grand Traverse Bay. So there's a lot of organizations working on it. And this is details of the Township Phragmites Management Plan, which I don't think I need to get into detail today. So we will move on. Let's see, these are just some examples of what we've done in the township. Here's one where there was Phragmites, where someone used to tie up their boat, and they got rid of the Phragmites through the program. And this is the one I showed in the beginning, boathouse, Phragmites, a fire hazard. Got rid of his Phragmites. This is Paul Wargo's place, by the way. This is the one I showed in Berkeley. It started like this in 12. In 13, it looked like that. I came and sprayed it, it looked like that. And the following year, it looked like that. So it does work. This is over at Brownfield. This is before we started on it. It was all solid Phragmites. And this was after we cut it over the winter. So that this was nice fresh Phragmites for our first treatment. This was after we sprayed it and cut it again in the fall. And this was after they dredged it. So if you go over there now, you might find a few little Phragmites coming up over this side, which we spray every year, but lots of nice, healthy native plants coming up right around the edge of the pond. Let's see, long-range planting. Long-range planting, treat the outliers first. So if you have big areas and small areas, start with the little areas and work with your neighbors, photograph your progress, and be patient. This was that first meeting that we had when I told people they could come over and I'd tell them about Phragmites. We had the 71 people show up. So the last page is resources. My website, phragmites.org. You can subscribe to my newsletter on Phragmites if you'd like by sending subscribe to that. This is the State of Michigan website on controlling Phragmites. And this is that guide to Phragmites management that the state put out. And I'm open for questions. Yes, sir.
Why not, when you have the early growth in the spring, why not spray then and then spray again in the fall?
Well, in the past, we have found it's better to have as much green, fresh growth above the ground when we do that fall spraying to get as much chemical into the plant to go to the roots. So I really don't know if you spray it in the spring and you sort of kill the top of the plant in the spring, and the roots are still alive. If it resprouts during that year, I don't know if you'll have enough green growth left on there to get a good fall kill on it.
One year I bought some short clear because it was going into my canal. So I did the edges and I never had a problem after that with the edges.
Mm-hmm. Do you remember what time of the year you sprayed it?
It was the spring.
It was the spring.
But the rest, I mean, the part that I couldn't, didn't get to, there was Phragmites there. But
right.
I just was concerned more about the edge at that
right.
time. We cut the rest down, kept cutting, but now with the water up so much, I can't cut it anymore.
It could be with small new growth that it's more easily affected by that spring spraying, even though I don't know for sure. But it could be that with a small root system that's fairly fresh, maybe it does get to the roots. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
The average weed whacker won't touch that old growth. Is there any adapter you can put on the weed whacker that will cut that stuff?
Well, I have adapted one of mine with a circular saw blade that I have used at times, but the sickle bar cutter is much safer than the circular saw blade.
There's also like a metal blade that my neighbor has on his weed whacker, and it's like,
It's like a 3-blade,
yeah,
3 metal blade, they work good.
yeah, and that works real good because
You get them in any.
I was cutting
store.
that area.
Yeah,
like
they will.
ants with the,
Yeah, they work good.
You just sharpen them up too, because they're not that sharp when you buy them. But you can whack, brush this thick
yeah,
one.
I did that area. The advantage of using somebody else is that it's a chore. When that stuff grows, and it gets thick and
Yeah,
you have to kind of pull it out of the way just to walk through it.
right. Yes, sir.
We have our property, what if that property is attached to state land? Is that where you need a permit to go beyond?
Well, yes, you're only really allowed to spray on your own property. But if there's state land adjacent to you, we can get, or the township can get permission from the state to allow you to spray on their property.
Is that a long process?
No. It's basically, I heard Chuck will answer that, because he's done the contact. This is Chuck Miller, who was one of our Phragmites board members and a past chairman of the board. Chuck, you have something on that?
When we do the permit is really an area permit. And we've had contact with the DNR where, to the extent that your property is abutted by DNR property that needs work, we can step over there and do that. Typically what we do is we have a map available of the areas on a large scale so that they have an idea where you're doing it. And they're happy with that so far, as long as we follow our permit requirements, which is the posting and so on and so forth. Because in effect, we're getting a permit to spray their property through us, all at one time, you and them. And they're tickled with that. So that was a quid pro quo with us to be able to do that. And we sprayed, Jan can tell you, we sprayed a fair amount of state acreage. And in effect, we've done it on your nickel. But otherwise,
State likes it.
done.
Yeah.
But you have to have the permit to cut.
Sure.
No,
To cut.
it's included with the Clay Township permit.
Yeah, right.
Any other questions?
Yeah.
Oh, Chuck.
On your application form here, you have that the permit application should be submitted by you, Jan. Is there a deadline this year for this submitting of these applications?
Yeah, it's written in there somewhere.
It is?
Yep.
Okay. Can I make one other, just a quick comment, Bob?
Sure.
Did anyone here on Hazard's Island? Yeah.
I think it's,
Anybody on the South Channel? Green Drive? Okay. I've been retired for a couple of years with this group, and I'm back. And I'm going to help out Jan and Bob this year. And anyone that needs help along the South Channel, Green Drive, anything like that, let me know, or let Jan know, and he'll let me know, and I'll be helping.
Okay.
And that means accessing when we can get available, the accessing of the equipment that Bob's probably told you about that we have, Jan. Okay?
We haven't covered that yet, but Jan, you want to tell them what equipment we've got?
Well, we have a mobile land unit. It's a 300-gallon tank with a high-pressure pump with 300 feet of hose that can be used on land and on the water. We have a pontoon boat with the same equipment, 300 feet of hose, high-pressure pump. Can pull up to somebody's property and spray along their canals or in the canal and get the edges of the canal, or go to the back of the property like on Dickinson Island. In McDonald Island, I've been in there, and Phragmites are coming over their sheds and take that hose right all the way back there and do a good job on it. So that's available. Just gotta, call me and we'll schedule a.
is there a fee for that?
It's a donation.
Okay.
That's all. Yeah.
And we recommend that if you can, to help out with that spraying. So
Is your number on
the day that they're going to come and do it, if you can suit up and be one of the people dragging the hose and so forth, and put in a couple hours when they're helping another piece of property do their spraying, because not everyone can do that. You get to someone's house who's 75 years old, and we really don't want them out there exerting themselves. So.
I resemble that remark.
Well, that's okay. I'm with you.
I
Yes,
still
sir.
do it, yeah.
You said after you've done a couple treatments that you do have to cut after?
Well, if you're going to spray again next year, which you should do, then you should cut it afterwards or next spring.
Next spring.
Yeah. And then, by the time you do the first 2-year treatments, you might not have to cut after that because what you've got left might be so sparse that it's not really gonna get in the way.
So all the dead stuff along the shoreline right now, now is an okay time to cut that down? Okay.
Speaking of the shoreline, so the new growth comes, like, cut it down this May up to the water's edge, but you can't, we're not gonna go in the water, let's say. But there's still, yeah, okay, let's say we don't. So now in August, we've got the new growth. Do we have to worry about overspraying into the water area? I mean, it's a river, right? So anything you spray in the water is.
Well, all of the permits and so forth include spraying over water. As long as you're using the correct chemicals, then you're allowed to spray on the water.
Right. Yeah, but one of them was 25 feet, you gotta watch your neighbors, but the water's gonna, any overspray is gonna go right down the river. But that being said, can you spray the new growth, the new sprout in the water? You could just spray that.
You just spray right on it,
It goes
yeah.
out 30, 40 feet.
Right.
Spray right on top.
Yep, and once the chemical hits the water, it's really not going to affect the plants downstream. The chemical, once it gets in the water, the effectiveness of it is reduced to the point where it's not going to kill your
Gotta
neighbor's
get on the
plant.
leaves. Gotta get on the leaves.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like a flat leaf kill.
So it kills all the cattails and
Dries
everything,
it.
is that what you're saying?
Oh, sure. Okay, so this spring, all of us cut our, have all these leftover, we don't necessarily want to bundle them. Can we burn them?
You can, yep. I would recommend if you're going to burn a decent amount of Phragmites, you contact the fire department to let them know what you're doing and when you're doing it.
Small controlled burn.
Yeah.
You say you bundle them, burn a bundle at a time,
Right, yeah,
feed another one like a campfire.
right. Best way. You don't want them necessarily going in a dumpster.
No. Well, okay, here's the thing. In the state of Michigan, well, first of all, you don't want them going into compost, definitely. So you don't put them in with your bags of leaves that are going to a compost. But in the state of Michigan, if you're controlling invasive plants under a invasive plant control program, which the township program is, you're allowed to put it in the regular trash. So if you have some Phragmites that you want to put in trash bags, you can do that. It is, they passed a state law about 2 years ago that invasive plants collected under a planned program can go in the regular trash. Any other questions?
Yeah, I have one. I'm kind of a cheap guy. Is there any way to make money by harvesting these things?
By harvesting it. Well, you can probably make money by cutting down people's Phragmites for them and getting rid of it.
Well, I'm talking about harvesting it like a crop and
You know-
using it for, I don't know, making wallpaper or...
There's
Kids are smoking.
There's different uses that people are using Phragmites for. Some people are using it like bamboo and they're chopping it up and they're making paper out of it. Other people have made pens online. You can go to Phragmites.com. They make pens out of the stalks. And then there's been a lot of research being done about harvesting it for energy, where they would grind it up and either make it into pellets or they would burn it in power plants or something like that. But at this point, the cost of harvesting it is not compensating for the money they're making off of the energy they're taking out of it. But people are working on developing little processing plants that you can take out to like Harson's Island, and then you go around and collect all the Phragmites and bring it to this local place, and then they make it into something useful. But at this point, it's not viable until there's.
Rich overnight by harvesting.
You will not get rich overnight. No, I don't think so.
Okay.
But if you do, let me know. Okay. Yes, sir.
That sickle you were talking about, can those be purchased? A sickle
What about it?
for underwater cutting, where do you get those?
I have it at my house, you can call me up and you can borrow it.
Okay.
Yeah, it belongs to the township.
I have a second.
You do that by hand?
And I actually bought a battery operated one at, I can't remember the name of it, that place up in,
Seems like the weed
that
razor.
discount tool store that you sent me to, Chuck.
Water gets up to here.
Harbor Freight?
No, it's like tools, tools something, it's up around Frankenmuth in one of those places. Any other questions? Well, if there's no more questions, I will say that we're wrapping it up, and thank you very much for coming, and we'll be around for a while.